Since 1979, worker productivity in this country is up 90%. Pay for that same average worker is up 33%. You are producing almost 3 times more value per hour than your dad's generation did, and getting paid a fraction of the difference. And that's not a feeling, that's not a vibe, that's the actual gap between what you're worth to your employer and what shows up in your paycheck, and it's been widening for over 4 decades straight. And I want to walk through exactly where that gap came from, because once you see the actual numbers, just work harder stops sounding like advice and starts sounding like something else. Let's put a real number on it. If pay had kept climbing at the same rate as productivity since 1979, the typical worker would be making around $16.40 more per hour today. Not a raise you asked for and didn't get. $16 an hour that should already be in your check every single week, and isn't. Over a full-time year, that's real money. That's a car payment. That's the difference between renting and buying. That's the difference between working one job and working two. And before anybody says, well, people are just paid what they're worth now, productivity means you're producing more per hour. Companies aren't losing money on you. The value is going somewhere. It's just not going into your check anymore. And it hasn't been since around 1979. And this isn't a story about the poorest workers falling behind while everybody else did fine. Even workers doing better than 90% of the workforce, real high performers, well above the average pay, still didn't keep pace with how much more productive the economy became. The gap doesn't stop once you're doing well, it just gets smaller near the top and stays wide for almost everybody else. Meanwhile, the highest earners now make about 18 times what the lowest paid workers make. That's not a gap anymore. That's a different economy running next to the one most of us are in. So what actually broke? Economists who've dug into this break it into a couple of pieces, and it's worth understanding both because they point at different things. Part of it is what's called the falling labor share, meaning a smaller slice of every dollar a company makes goes to people doing the work, and a bigger slice goes to shareholders and ownership. That shift alone accounts for a big chunk of the widening gap since the 2000s. Part of it is rising inequality, even within worker pay itself. The gains didn't spread out evenly. They piled up near the top, among executives and specialized high earners, while pay for everybody else barely moved. Now here's the part that should make you angry. This isn't some law of nature like gravity. Researchers who study this are pretty clear that wage stagnation came out of specific policy choices, decisions about labor law, bargaining power, and how companies are allowed to operate. Which means it's not inevitable. It was built, one decision at a time over decades. And what got built can theoretically get rebuilt, just not by you alone working harder. Meanwhile, the cost of actually building a life kept climbing regardless. Take housing. Back in 1980, the typical home cost about 3.5 times the typical household's income. Today, it's more like 5 times income, and in plenty of cities, it's a lot higher than that. Home prices are up over 500% since 1980. Yes, I said 500. Incomes are up around 370% over that same stretch. That gap, that's the gap between hard work gets you a house and hard work gets you a really nice apartment, if you're lucky. So layer that on top of the pay gap we just talked about. You're already earning less than your labor is worth by historical standards. And the thing you're trying to buy with what's left, a home, some stability, has gotten dramatically more expensive relative to what you make. That's not one problem, that's 2 separate trends, squeezing from both directions at the same time, and it's been happening for the same 40 plus years. And it's not just buying, renting has gotten squeezed too. The median home price nationally just crossed $440,000. Financial experts generally say housing is affordable when it costs around 2.5 times your household income. Right now, the national ratio is over 5 times income, and there isn't a single major metro area left in the country that hits that old affordability benchmark. Not one. So, when someone tells a 25-year-old to just save up and buy a starter home like their grandparents did, they're describing a version of the economy that doesn't exist anymore. So I want to be straight with you about why I'm making this video. It's not to make you feel hopeless, it's the opposite. A lot of working people carry around a quiet private shame about their money situation. Like if they just worked a little harder, hustled a little more, they'd have caught up by now. I've felt that, and maybe you have too. But look at the math again. 90% productivity growth, 33% pay growth. That gap didn't open up because you didn't try hard enough. It opened up because of decisions made way above your pay grade by people who were never going to invite you into the room. You didn't lose a fair competition. The competition wasn't fair to begin with. That doesn't mean effort doesn't matter. It still does at the individual level for your own situation. Working hard still gets you ahead of where you'd otherwise be. What it means is that hard work stopped being a reliable path to keeping pace with the overall cost of living, the way it mostly was for the generation or two before us. Those are two different claims, and mixing them up is exactly what lets just work harder advice survive as long as it has. It's not wrong about effort mattering, it's wrong about effort being enough on its own. And I think that distinction matters for how you carry this. You can keep working hard, keep trying to get ahead, and still hold on to the fact that if it feels harder than it should, it actually is harder than it should be. That's not an excuse, that's just an accurate read on the economy you're actually operating in, instead of the one people keep describing to you. So no, working hard by itself was never going to be enough to keep up. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because the math changed underneath all of us, starting decades before most of us even entered the workforce. If you felt like you're running as fast as you can and still losing ground, you're reading the situation correctly, and that's not a personal failure. That's you accurately noticing a real trend. Tell me where you feel this gap the most. Is it housing? Is it your paycheck? Is it both? Drop it in the comments. And if this made the math click for you, that's exactly what I'm trying to do with this channel. Show the real numbers and behind what working people are actually up against. So until I see you in the next video, take care of yourself.